Hello everyone, this is William with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1917 Diary Series. Hopefully I'll be a little less tongue-tied than I was in the last video. It is the 13th of September. Wow, I'm off to a great start here. The 13th of December 2025, and we are with Dmitri on the 29th of October 1917. Our recap. So we're doing a long diary entry. This will be part 4, and there will be 2 more parts. So it really is a long diary entry devoted to the Bolshevik Revolution, the October Revolution. And yeah, in the last video, Dmitri had brought up for the first time the subject of civil war and the likelihood that there would be a civil war. And then he had made a comparison of Bolshevism to his own recent experience of having a boil on his leg that had finally burst. All right, here we go. Yes, exclamation point. It will be terribly interesting to see what happens. But, of course, one must expect big events and perhaps tragic ones. For this one must be prepared, but I am convinced that it will all be for the best. And once again, of course, saying this and thinking about the facts from a broad perspective, my thoughts involuntarily go to questions of everyday life. Involuntarily, with fear, one awaits these great events. Great events is in quotation marks, about which I have just now spoken with such philosophical detachment, involuntarily, terribly fearing it. What must life bring? What outcome will these events have? What will they do and what will they be like? My God, what must be happening in Petrograd now? What are Laming and poor Papa living through? Exclamation point. How can they, unhappy men, live on top of such a horrible volcano? According to Wilton and MacDonald, the English consul in Baku, everyone in Russia, or a great many of the more reasonable people, were waiting for the onset of just such an active uprising of the Bolsheviks, finding that it alone is capable of opening the eyes of the majority and even the members of the government. But I repeat once more what I have already said, that if the power of the maximalists lasts long, they will do so much damage to the country that the strongest reaction will not be able to set things straight. It will be interesting to see the attitude of the enemy towards us if the Bolshevik government, supported by the troops, finds the strength to last for a while! Exclamation point. I don't think the Bolsheviks will conclude a peace, and as I said earlier, will limit themselves to occupying important points on the front. My God, what a hard time we are living through, and how will it ever end? Indeed, that's the question. So, going back up to the top here, looking at language, a lot of the content here is things that Dmitri have already covered, it has already commented on in this same diary entry. But his use of language is always very interesting. For instance, that he uses terms like terribly interesting. Sounds so detached, doesn't it? Russia will be swept away by a civil war. Well, that's terribly interesting. But you know, I'm playing the devil's advocate here. That's not the way he means it, of course. But we know that there are these, and he talks about the fact that there are these 2 sides to him as he's looking at this. One, the side of the man who's always been very interested in current events from a kind of chess-playing perspective. And the other is the one whose whole life has been turned upside down and whose loved ones are at imminent risk of not just arrest, but death. All right, and he counters that. no, he doesn't counter it, but he says these same words that he uses over and over again, whether in Russian or English, for the best. What does he say? I'm convinced that it will all be for the best. So this is right out of the self-help books, that expression. Okay, what next? His use of the word involuntary in this instance. He uses it in the same paragraph, just 2 sentences. He uses it 3 times. So something that can't be helped. Involuntary or involuntarily may be, you could say, a clumsy translation. I just couldn't think of another word. So what he means is that he can't help it. My thoughts involuntarily go to questions of everyday life. So he can't help having these thoughts. Involuntarily with fear, one awaits. So being afraid is involuntary. You know, what reasonable person wouldn't be afraid? And then this beautiful juxtaposition where he talks about, I've just now spoken with such philosophical detachment. So he gets it, that, you know, it's almost like he's looking at all of this from an analytical perspective. So I've spoken with such philosophical attachment, and then involuntarily, terribly fearing it. So there's this gripping fear and anxiety, which he can't help. But he's dealing with it by, you know, the self-help for the best, positive thinking sort of thing. When he refers to everyday life, you know, he kind of leaves that open. What do you mean? My thoughts go to questions of everyday life. I guess he just means, you know, what's happening to the people he loves in Russia and what's happening, or what is likely to happen to himself there in Persia. What must life bring? Okay, and he mentions, it's interesting who he mentions as far as the people that he's concerned about. And always at the top of the list are these 2 men that are almost one man. Laming, the tutor who had been with Dmitri, the not just tutor, but the person really in loco parentis with both Dmitri and Maria, which was Georgy Mikhailovich Laming, since Dmitri was 10 years old. And then Papa, Grand Duke Paul, his actual father. So we've talked about that before. They each had a paternal role in Dmitri's life. They were different paternal roles. But Dmitri tends to mention them together, side by side. And he's very worried about both of them. Although certainly Paul is at greater risk, since Laming is not a member of the imperial family or even an aristocrat. He doesn't mention Maria. He doesn't mention Yusupov or Vera Karali. Apparently, I wouldn't say it wasn't because he cared about them, especially his sister, but apparently he thinks that they're likely to do all right relative to Laming and Papa. Laming would actually get out. Paul, as we know, would end up being killed by the Bolsheviks. All right, and Dmitri is quite right when he characterizes them as living on top of a horrible volcano. All right, then he talks about Wilton and MacDonald. So we know he's getting information from Reuters, from the news service. But in recent times, in this period that he's been writing about, Wilton and MacDonald, both Englishmen, have been 2 major sources of information, I think not only for Dmitri, but for Sir Charles, the British minister as well. So Wilton was King's messenger who had just been in Petrograd. MacDonald, of course, had spent his whole career in Baku, in Azerbaijan, which was part of the Russian Empire. So they both, when they came, brought lots of news with them. This reference that Dmitri makes to reasonable people. Reasonable people expected this uprising of the Bolsheviks, and reasonable people think that it's kind of a good thing because it's the only thing that's capable of opening the eyes of the Russian people to to what the Bolsheviks really are. And one thing you may have noticed in everything that Dmitri has written since the Bolshevik Revolution started and since before, there's not one iota of extremism. That was not him. He's not saying extreme things. He's not saying even, violent things. That's just not him, and it never will be, all the way up through to the end of his life in 1942, in the midst of the Second World War. He was never going to be radicalized. He was never going to be an extremist. He belonged to these ranks of reasonable people. Okay, so again, it's just this basic juxtaposition, and you can imagine him just going over and over and over of all of this in his mind and thinking, good thing versus bad thing, good thing versus bad thing. On the one side, this effect of opening people's eyes. On the other side, if the Bolsheviks are around much longer, there's going to be so much damage that, it won't be an easy task to repair things, if things can be repaired at all. And he was, I don't know if he was right. If the Bolsheviks had only lasted, say, until shortly after the Civil War, if they'd been decisively beaten, what would have happened then? Interesting to speculate, but I don't know. Of course, as we know, they prevailed in the Civil War. Okay, so the final topic for this little section is the Germans. Dmitri refers to them as the enemy, not just the Germans, but the whole Central Powers in the First World War. But primarily it was the Germans who were targeting Russia at this time. So it will be interesting. Here we go again with the analytic Dmitri. It will be interesting to see the attitude of the enemy towards us if the Bolsheviks find the strength to last for a while. It will be interesting, won't it? So we'll see what he says about that later. But he doesn't think the Bolsheviks will conclude a separate peace. So this is already very much on the mind of everyone among the Allies. What's the impact of this going to be on the war, which is still raging? The armistice won't be signed until November 1918. So it's well over a year away. So what will the Bolsheviks sign a separate peace with the Germans? Well, of course, we know that they do, but at this stage, at least in October 1917, Dmitri doesn't think they will. He thinks that, so the army has fallen apart, but he thinks that, according to him, or what he's heard, he thinks that they will just occupy some, what he says, important points on the front to hold the Germans at bay. I don't see how that's really going to work. If the Germans are in a position to throw a lot of troops at Russia, then this little limited force occupying a few important points isn't going to, stem the tide. But anyway, I'm getting into things that, yes, it would be very fun to talk to Dmitri about, but I shouldn't be yammering on about them. Okay, what do we have next time? Well, he's going to broaden his outlook to include the war outside of Russia's borders, the war from a broader perspective, and precisely this issue of how the Bolshevik takeover will affect the war. It's already affecting it in terms of the catastrophic military loss of the Italians against the Austrians. So he's going to talk about that. And he's also going to talk a little bit about the fact that Persia is really on the edge of a revolution itself. So very interesting stuff. We're going to get more of the analytical Dmitri before we do the final section of this long diary entry, which is very much the personal Dmitri. So, please do come back for all of that, and I'll see you next time. Bye.